Self-reflection is one of the most important practices in personal development for a man, for you to become a great man. If you're not practicing self-reflection, if you're not applying that practice in all areas of your life, you are hindering your growth. And if you don't start applying self-reflection in your life, you will never ever achieve your fullest potential as a beneficial man or as a man in general. It just won't happen. Um, Welcome to the channel. My name is Jamal Calpin. This is the Beneficial Black Man. We're focused on discussing faith, mental and emotional well-being, and creativity and a variety of other things to help Black men to become more beneficial for their community. I'm your host, Jamal Calpin. This is episode 51 of the Beneficial Black Man podcast, and I want to talk about self-reflection because it's so important and it's actually been a very important thing in my own life. Um, in previous episodes of the podcast and on the channel, I talk about journaling. I talk about going through my own journey of personal development, mental health, emotional development, all those things, and it's really really important. And I think for our community and as men, we need to continue to do work to become our best selves. And if we don't, I don't think I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves and to those around us. And so self reflection is so important to that. Making time and dedicating time and doing this practice to look back on yourself, to check in with yourself, to reflect, to take a moment to see where are you? Where have you been? What's been going on with you? If you don't do that, you can't effectively grow because you can't identify the things that are necessary to change, the things that you need to improve on, or even to see how much you've grown over days, weeks, months, years. If you're not taking time to sit down and reflect on yourself and assess where you are, where you've been, and even where you would like to go, you can't make improvements. You can't get better. And if we're supposed to be leaders, if we're supposed to be impacting our community and being beneficial men, striving to become beneficial men who live for glory and for good and pursue joy, we have to make that a practice. We have to make that a regular habit in our lives. And for me, I've talked about in previous videos how I've been journaling for a long time. But something about journaling is you can write down your thoughts. You can get your thoughts out. You can express yourself. And I'm a big proponent of having an emotional release valve. But if you don't go back and see where you were or see what you wrote down, that's only like half of the benefit of what that practice does. So journaling is definitely important, and I'm going to touch more on it a little bit later in my notes. But it's you have to make that time to go back and see where was I, what was I feeling, what's going on with me. And I know even in my marriage, like going back and reading old journal entries of where I was 2 years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and seeing how things have changed in my relationship with my wife, even in the way that I look at life, my faith walk, how I look at business and work and things like that. Going back and seeing like, oh wow, I'm actually changing, I'm actually growing, and going back and questioning, oh, why was I thinking this? Has really helped me with confidence, helped me to know that like I'm actually growing, and the work that I'm going through and like the time I'm praying, I'm going to counseling, and all that stuff is actually paying off because when I look back on that stuff, it's almost like seeing a totally different person. But I also know that there's more work that needs to be done. So like this practice of self-reflection has changed my life in a huge way. And really, I actually picked this up even uh before I got married. When I was in college, I was taking it was American Studies class. So I majored in American Studies, which is kind of a mix between sociology and anthropology and focuses on American culture, American society. And my concentration was media studies. So that's So I'm really into music and film and TV and stuff like that. And I like to analyze it and critique it. But in one of these classes, we had to do a paper on self-reflection, like a self-reflexive paper where we would go back and look at aspects of our lives and see what we could learn from that. So that was looking at our childhood, looking at our time in high school, looking at different aspects of our lives. And having to do that in that class, in that course, was really eye-opening because you don't typically we're always looking forward. We don't spend a lot of time looking back. We don't take time to be like, where have I been? What's going on? We're always focused on tomorrow. We're always focused on where we got to go next. And even with that, like sometimes we're not even able to be present, in the current moment because we're always focused on tomorrow. We're always focused on the next thing, whether it's making more money or our next meal. Like I don't know if that's ever happened to you. Like you wake up in the morning, say you get something to eat, right? You get breakfast or whatever, and like 15 minutes later, you're thinking about, oh, well, what's for dinner? Well, what's for lunch? And like we're always thinking about the next thing. And I think that's part of human nature, but we have to get into the practice of having that balance of looking back to and critiquing that and learning from it. Because if we don't, we set ourselves up to not actually grow and get better, you know? So I wanted to define or look at definitions of self-reflection or to reflect, being self-reflexive before I go further on with this topic. All right. So if we look at the definition of reflection here on dictionary.com, says the act of reflecting, as in casting back a light or heat, mirroring, or giving back or showing an image, the state of being reflected in this way. An image, representation, counterpart. A fixing of the thoughts on something, careful consideration. A thought occurring in consideration or meditation. An unfavorable remark or observation. Let's see. So that's, oh wait, I think there was another one. The act of reflecting, this is from the British Dictionary. The act of reflecting or the state of being reflected, something reflected or the image so produced as by mere careful or long consideration or thought. I really like this definition because yeah, you are reflecting on something. And again, if we're not doing that to ourselves, about ourselves, there's so much, I don't want it to sound so sterile, but there's so much data and information that we are neglecting about ourselves, particularly as men, if we're not making time for that, if we're not going back and considering our emotions, considering our thoughts, considering how we're feeling, even what we believe in at one point or time in our lives, and questioning those things, taking those things apart, deconstructing them, and trying to learn from them. Even if it's thinking about, oh, I just had an argument at my job or with my spouse or whatever. How did that argument go? How did it make me feel? What about that conversation made me feel this way or that way? What could I have done better? Again, very often we just keep moving. Just keep going on to the next thing and don't look back to see what can we improve? How can we get better? And I think the sad part is that kind of practice of self-reflection shows up in the areas of our lives. For instance, like work. If you have like a performance review or even in education, you get your report card or whatever, and you may analyze that aspect of your life. You may analyze like, how did I do with my studies or how did I do on my job? But very rarely do we do that with our own personal well-being, with our physical health, with our emotional mental health. Even with physical health, sometimes the only time we think about it is when we go to the doctors. You know, However often you go. So say you do a physical checkup once a year, right? You may go in, the doctor tells you some stuff, then he looks at your weight, or they look at your weight, they look at your vitals or whatever, and then they give you some feedback. It's like, well, this is where you are now, and this is where you were last year or the year before. And then we sit there and be like, wow, I do need to make some changes. Hmm. I guess I could improve on this. And maybe for a couple of weeks after that, we're like, I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to exercise more. But then we start to like slowly forget and we don't keep going. And that's why we have to keep being reflective and looking back on ourselves because we got to check in. If you don't check in, like it's just so easy to fall back in the old habits. Sorry for the ads. You know how the I don't know why dictionary websites, maybe because they don't it's free. They have to put up so many ads. But anyways, self-reflective. This is from the Cambridge Dictionary. Thinking about your own feelings and behavior and the possible reasons for them. Again, it's important that we do this. You need to check in with yourself. You need to see where are you? Where were you? What's going on with you? That way you can actually make some changes. So you can make an effort to actually get better. I know 100% if I didn't learn this process of actually taking time and paying attention to myself and learning things about myself, learning things from my past, I would not be where I am today. Not in my marriage, not professionally, not emotionally, not I think I would be in a really crappy place if I just always kept my eyes forward and never looked backwards or never checked in with myself. Because it sucks because I think sometimes we don't really stop, particularly as men. I don't think we don't really stop to check in with ourselves until something really, really breaks down. So whether it's physically, whether it's emotionally, whether it's spiritually, like sometimes you could be walking with the Lord and not even really paying attention, kind of just going through the cycles, going through the motions. But when something bad happens, when a family member gets sick, or when you get into like hard times, that's when you really want to talk to God. And I get it. That's not the case for everybody in their spiritual walk. But when stuff starts hitting the fan, that's when we kind of wake up. But we don't have to live like that. We don't have to live only in emergencies. Like an emergency pops up, then we're active. We're paying attention to our life. We're doing things. We're trying to make changes. But then we start coasting. Like it's so important that again we put this practice, like we start doing the self-reflection so that we don't have to wait for the next emergency, so that our journey isn't just up and then flat, up and then flat, up and then flat. If we're actually paying attention, checking in on ourselves, we can actually continue to go upwards. Because every time we look back, all right, what can I build on from last time? What can I learn from last time so I can fix and improve? And you know, I've heard different advice. Okay, so like with this YouTube creation stuff, there's this YouTube content creator, Sean Cannell. Maybe you guys have heard of him. Think Media. Anyways, he has this advice that you want to do 1% better every video you make. Even with that, it requires you to look back. You need to look back on the videos that you made. And even if we all committed to trying to be 1% better every day, taking time to look back. All right, what happened yesterday that I didn't like, or something that I can improve on? Whether it's how I talk to a coworker, how I talk to my spot, how do I talk to myself? Like really checking the negative thoughts that you're having. If we commit to making a 1% improvement every day, even in just 90 days, we can be drastically different than who we were. But again, that's why it's so important to actually apply this practice in your life of self-reflection. Here's another definition real quick before we move on to the next point I want to make. Self-examination, which is another way of looking at self-reflection or being self-reflexive. Self-reflexive. This is Merriam-Webster. A reflective examination of one's beliefs or motives, introspection, examination of one's body, especially for evidence of disease. And I like this definition, the evidence of disease, because again, disease doesn't only have to be physical. In a previous video, I talked about mental illness and how, honestly, I believe one, I think the world in general is suffering a lot from poor mental health. And more specifically, I believe the United States, the country that I live in, is severely impacted by mental health issues, and needs counseling. Absolutely. And I think as Black men, that's something that we really need, because I think our mental health is severely jacked up. And I think mental illness is one of the biggest reasons we're not where we should be as leaders and as servant leaders and men in our community. And so self-examination, you need to, yes, you should go to a doctor to get examined, but you should also be taking time to examine yourself of any dis-ease that you may have, not only physically, but yes, mentally and emotionally. Do you have bitterness just sitting inside of you? Do you have pride? Do you have wrath? Do you have anger? Like, do you have these things, like even fear or excessive doubt? Check in with yourself. Just don't keep going with the flow and going in the motions. Check in with yourself. That's really, really important. And there's a Bible verse that comes to mind that I think really explains this. Let me make the font bigger. All right. So this is from James chapter 1, verses 22 through 25. It reads, But be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. For if any be a hearer of the word, and not a doer, he is like unto a man beholding his natural face in a glass. For he beholds himself and goes his way, and straightway forgets what manner of man he was. But whoso looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. Now, the scripture is talking about, somebody's faith walk and their relationship with the Most High. So yes, you should look at the scriptures, learn from it, and make changes in your life. I think the same thing applies with our own personal development and with the practice of self-reflection. Like, our lives day to day are pages in a book. And very often we spend a lot of time reading other people's books and not enough time reading from the pages of our own book. And we need to make time for that. Yes, every second, every moment, we are making choices and decisions that are writing out our lives. And yeah, if you're a follower of the Most High, you are trying your best to walk in alignment with Him and let Him write in your life. But we need to go back and look, all right, well, what happened in chapter 3? Go back and look what happened in chapter 17. Go back and look what happened in chapter 21. And see, okay, if I want the story to end differently over here than the way it started, I need to make sure I'm making changes. I need to make sure I'm making adjustments. But if we don't do that, if we don't look back on ourselves, if we don't take time to self-reflect, we hinder ourselves from making those changes. We become that person who looks at the mirror of the word, but isn't a doer. You just hear it, but you're not actually putting anything into practice. It's the same thing. Even if we all journaled, even if we all went to counseling, even if we all went to therapy, if we don't actually learn from what we see, from what we read, from what we gather from this self-reflection, we can't get any better. And that's why it's so important that, like, self-reflection is so key to us becoming our best selves, because it requires us to look at ourselves and actually make changes. Because if you just continue to look at your life and settle for mediocrity, settle for complacency, settle for laziness, settle for cowardice, settle for all of these things that aren't good, how are you being a beneficial man? How are you actually being your best self? You can't. You have to do this practice of self reflection, learn from it, make changes practically in your life so that you can be your best self. If you don't do that, you're not living. Honestly, you're not living, and you're not being your best self. And we have to stop wasting time being mediocre. As Black men, we have to do more work on ourselves to be our best selves, because we need to be our best selves for ourselves. We need to be our best selves for our community. And ultimately, I believe, for God's glory. We need to do that. And to do that, we need to be self reflexive. So, what I would encourage you to do, what I challenge you to do, is on my channel, I have a mini series about journaling, the practice of journaling, why I started journaling, why it's important. Go watch that mini series. And I'll put a link somewhere, maybe in the description or whatever. But go and watch that series, because I want you to start this practice of self-reflection, and it starts with getting your thoughts down. You have to get yourself out so that you can look at it. And journaling is one of the easiest ways to do that. Get your thoughts out, get your feelings out, take records of how you're feeling, and then go back and look at it and critique it. See where you are. Question your feelings, question your emotions. Wonder why you were feeling the way you were, thinking the way you were. What was going on with your life at that time? And making an effort to make changes. Try to be 1% better than you were, day after day, week after week, if you can, whatever. Take that time to look back, reflect on yourself, so that you can continue to strive to become a beneficial man. All right. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. For those who are listening on your favorite podcasting app or whatever, I really, really appreciate it. Again, if you like the channel, like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you all on the next one. Peace.